The adventures of Galloping Dick are scarcely less notorious than those of the celebrated Turpin or the unfortunate Dick King, the gentleman highwayman. Richard Ferguson was the son of a gentleman's valet and was a native of Hertfordshire. Having received some little education, he was at an early age taken into employment in the establishment of his father's master as a stable boy. Being an active lad, and withal well versed in the management of horses, he was temporarily employed as postilion during the illness of the regular servant. But, being at length compelled to return to his more humble duties of stable boy, his pride could ill brook the degradation, and he determined to look for higher employment. A friend of his master was in want of a postilion, and young Dick applied for the place. His qualifications were at once admitted, and he was engaged, and immediately accompanied his new employer to London. His habits were, at this time, of such a nature as to render him a favorite with his master, and by means of steadiness and perseverance, he remained during a considerable period in the same service. But being at length discovered in a situation with one of the female servants which left no doubt of his claims to a character for gallantry, he was dismissed. He remained out of place during a considerable period, and resorting to public houses, he became acquainted with a number of persons of his own condition, from whom he speedily acquired a knowledge of all the vices fashionable among the party-colored gentry. He, at length, was compelled to accept employment in the service of a livery stable keeper in Piccadilly. But his master dying, he was again thrown upon the town, though not altogether without provision, for he had so far gained his master's good opinion that he had left him a legacy of £50. Dick was now the owner of a sum far greater than he had ever yet had the good fortune to possess, and he determined to commence business in a new line, that of gentleman. Purchasing mourning out of respect to his last employer, he frequented the theatres, and while at Drury Lane he became acquainted with a woman, his admiration of whose charms eventually, though by indirect means, proved his ruin. At first, he was disposed to imagine that she was a person of respectability, but, meeting with a ready acquiescence in his request to be permitted to accompany her home, he soon discovered the mistake into which he had fallen. Day after day he visited his Dulcinea, until he had disposed of all the cash he possessed, and then he began to find that there were others whose visits were more welcome than his. He, not unfrequently, met persons in their way, in or out of the house, with whose figures he became speedily familiar, and an accident subsequently made him acquainted with the nature of their avocations. Finding that he was no longer welcome to the house of his lady, he resolved now to endeavor to procure the means by which he hoped again to secure her favor, and he accepted a situation as postilion at an inn in Piccadilly. In his drives round the metropolis, he not unfrequently saw his rivals gaily dressed and mounted. But he was rather surprised one day, while on the North Road, at receiving a sudden summons to stop from a man, whose figure he fancied he recognized as that of one of them, but whose face was covered with crape. He speedily obeyed the order which he had so peremptorily received, and while the man who had called to him stood by his side with a pistol at his head, another, similarly disguised, galloped from a by-road to the chaise and demanded the money of its occupant. A sudden gust of wind now enabled our hero to satisfy himself of the truth of his surmises as to the highwayman near him, for the crape being momentarily blown from his face, he at once recognized in him one of the admirers of the lady of his affections, whom he subsequently found to be Jerry Avershaw. He stared at the man, but some persons at this moment appearing in view, the highwayman precipitately rode off. Avershaw, it appears, was no less uneasy at the discovery, which he knew had been made, than Ferguson was astonished. And pulling up with his companion at a roadside inn, they gave directions that Dick should be introduced to them on his stopping there to water his horses on his way home with the return chaise. Upon his entry, an offer was immediately made to him of a bribe to prevent his discovering the haunts of the thieves, and his acquiescence procured for him an invitation to sup with the highwayman on the same evening at their rendezvous in the Borough. With the money our hero flew to his doxy, but the lady, having now discovered his situation, declined to have anything more to say to him. The chance, which had operated to deprive him of the society of the lady, however, gained for him the companionship of her visitors, and meeting Avashaw at the house which he had appointed, he was received with every mark of attention. A sumptuous supper was served, and a large party having assembled, the night was spent in boisterous hilarity. Ferguson was delighted with the society to which he was introduced, and at once assented to a proposition that he should become one of their number, a sharer in their dangers and profits. In obedience to a suggestion which was offered, it was determined, however, that he should not yet be called upon to enter into active service, but that he should furnish his associates with information as to the routes of the various chaises which went from the inn where he was employed, so that they might intercept them and rob them. He pursued this diabolical plan with so much success as frequently to obtain some share of very large booties. But at length, his connection with the highwayman being suspected, he lost his place, and was compelled to take the road himself. In this new employment, he was long remarked for the most extraordinary success. Of a bold and daring disposition, he defied danger. His skill in horses was found to be of the greatest importance to him, and the headlong pace at which he would travel, when in pursuit of an object or when chased, procured for him the name of Galloping Dick. Numerous were the escapes which he succeeded in making from his pursuers, after he had committed robberies, and in one instance, having been concerned with 2 others in stopping 2 gentlemen in the Edgware Road, he succeeded in galloping off, while his companions were secured, and upon being tried were convicted and executed. Nor were his successes confined to the road. In his amours he was equally bold and enterprising, and equally happy. He persuaded 2 married women, the wives of publicans in the borough, to elope with him, and his intrigues were almost innumerable. To follow him through the whole of his exploits would be to occupy a very considerable portion of our limits with the recital of his case alone. He was concerned in almost every robbery which was committed in the neighborhood of the metropolis during the period at which he was celebrated, and his acquaintance and connection with other thieves were almost as extensive as his crimes. He was repeatedly in custody at Bow Street, and was several times tried at the Old Bailey, but acquitted. But at length, having been a party to a most daring robbery near Aylesbury, he was taken into custody within a short time of the commission of his offence, and being fully identified, he was committed for trial. He was indicted at the ensuing assizes, and a verdict of guilty having been found, he was sentenced to death. Upon his discovering that all hopes of mercy were vain, he sedulously applied himself to a preparation for his approaching end, and upon the day of execution conducted himself with decent resignation. He was executed at Aylesbury in the month of April 1800.